The knock came at 7:42 on a Saturday morning, hard enough to rattle the door in its frame. Not the polite knock of a neighbor borrowing sugar. Not the hesitant knock of someone who might turn around and leave. This was the knock of someone who had already decided. Ethan Cole had been awake for an hour. He'd been awake most of the night, actually, sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad covered in numbers that kept refusing to add up the way he needed them to. The coffee mug in his hand was still hot when the sound hit him, and he flinched hard enough that the dark liquid sloshed over the rim and scalded his thumb. Denver had been buried under 14 inches of fresh snow since Thursday. Through the frost-edged window above the sink, the world outside was relentlessly white: the parking lot, the bare oak tree, the bench where he and Maya sometimes sat in the summer to watch pigeons. All of it erased. All of it quiet. The silence that snow brings is different from other silences. It presses down on you. It reminds you of how small you are. He set the mug on the counter and crossed the apartment in 8 steps. He looked through the peephole. Claire Whitmore stood in the hallway. She wore a charcoal wool coat with a fur collar, her dark hair pinned back in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. She was holding a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. She was not smiling. In the fisheye distortion of the peephole, she looked both larger and further away than she was. She looked like a verdict. Ethan Cole was 38 years old. He had worked for Whitmore and Associates for 6 years, had been promoted twice, had weathered 2 rounds of layoffs, had rebuilt his entire professional identity from the wreckage of his personal one. He had thought he was good at reading rooms. He had thought he understood the business. He had been wrong. He opened the door. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was level. She didn't say good morning. She didn't say sorry to bother you on a weekend. "May I come in?" "Of course." He stepped back. He was still in his gray sweatpants and the faded University of Colorado shirt he'd slept in. His feet were bare. He became acutely aware of this. Claire stepped inside and looked at the apartment the way people look at things they are cataloging. The small living room with its IKEA couch and the mismatched throw blankets, the kitchen table with the legal pad, the construction paper drawings taped to the refrigerator, a horse, a rainbow, a figure labeled DAD in unsteady capital letters. She took all of it in without expression. "Is your daughter home?" "She's in her room." "Reading." "Probably." He lowered his voice. "She's 8. She sleeps in on Saturdays unless something wakes her up." Claire nodded and walked to the window, looking out at the buried parking lot. A long moment passed. Ethan didn't fill it. "The Hartwell proposal," she said finally. He had known, of course. He had known since 6 a.m. Friday, when he'd looked at his sent folder and found it empty where it shouldn't have been. He'd spent the rest of that day and all of the night trying to figure out what to say, how to explain it, whether there was any version of the story that ended differently. "I know," he said. Hartwell pulled the account. 14 years of business. She turned from the window. "They said they needed a partner who could meet deadlines. I didn't have an argument." "Claire, I need you to understand that I didn't come here to hear an explanation." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I came here because you deserve to hear this in person, not in an email, not from HR on Monday morning." She paused. "You're fired, Ethan. Effective immediately. HR will process the paperwork. 2-week severance." The words landed like something physical. He put his hand on the back of the couch. From down the hallway came the sound of small feet on hardwood. Maya appeared in the doorway of the living room, wearing her red pajamas with the white stars, her light brown hair in 2 lopsided braids from the night before. She was holding a paperback book with a horse on the cover. She looked at her father. She looked at Claire. She looked at her father again. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Claire said. Something shifted in her face, barely perceptible. "Maya." "Sweetie, go back to your room for a few minutes." "Okay." She studied Claire one more moment with the frank curiosity of an 8-year-old, then turned and padded back down the hall. Claire watched the empty doorway. Then she looked at Ethan. 2 weeks severance, she said again. I'm sorry. She picked up her portfolio. She walked to the door. She let herself out. Ethan stood in his bare feet on the cold kitchen floor. Outside, the snow was still falling. After Claire left, Ethan stood at the window for a long time. Not thinking, exactly. More like waiting for the shock to drain away so something more functional could take its place. Maya came back out at 8 o'clock and climbed onto the couch with her book. She didn't ask who the woman was. She didn't ask what had happened. She was a perceptive kid. His daughter, she had learned, somewhere in the last 3 years, to read the shape of her father's silences. He made her scrambled eggs and toast. He poured orange juice into the plastic cup with the blue fish on it. He sat across from her while she ate, and he held the legal pad in his lap under the table, because he needed to look at the numbers again. He needed them to be different than they had been at 3 a.m. They weren't. He'd been carrying the full weight of their finances in his head for so long that the arithmetic was automatic. Checking account, $1,380. Savings account, $420. Credit card debt, $3,900. Rent was due in 19 days, $1,150. The heating bill for December had come in at $287, which was $30 more than November's and probably not the ceiling. Maya needed new winter boots. The zipper on her current ones had broken 2 weeks ago, and he'd been using a safety pin as a temporary fix, which was the kind of thing that broke his heart quietly and repeatedly every morning. 2 weeks severance. That was roughly $2,800 after taxes. He added it up 4 ways and got the same answer each time. If he found no income in the next 6 weeks, they would be unable to pay February's rent. He set the legal pad face down on the seat cushion beside him. Maya finished her eggs. She looked up at him with Olivia's eyes, not the color, which was wrong, but the quality of attention behind them. The way she looked at you as though you were the most interesting thing in the room. That look had been one of the first things he'd loved about his wife. Finding it reproduced in his daughter's face was something he had never quite learned how to feel about. Olivia had been dead for 3 years and 2 months. She had been driving home from her sister's house in a snowstorm, on a road she knew perfectly well, when a pickup truck with bald tires slid through a stop sign and hit the driver's side door at 40 miles per hour. The paramedics had said she probably hadn't felt anything. He had spent a long time deciding whether that was supposed to be comforting. He had taken on the marketing director role at Whitmore and Associates 4 months after the funeral. It had given him structure, a reason to get up, get dressed, drop Maya at school, function like a person. He had been grateful for it in the specific, practical way that you are grateful for a life raft not because it's beautiful, but because it's there. Now it wasn't there. He did not cry. He had learned, in the years since Olivia, to postpone crying until Maya was asleep. It was a discipline, like any other. You identified the emotion, you acknowledged it, and you set it aside for later when it wouldn't frighten anyone. "Can we go to the park?" Maya asked. He looked at his daughter. Outside, it was 22 degrees and still snowing. The park would be empty and cold, and the ducks would be huddled at the edge of whatever ice-free water remained on the pond. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go to the park." She beamed at him. She had Olivia's smile, too wide and uncomplicated, the smile of someone who has not yet learned to be careful about being happy. He got up to find her winter coat. He did not look at the legal pad. The numbers would still be there when he got back. They always were. Cheeseman Park in winter was a different country. In summer, it was full of dogs and cyclists and people throwing frisbees in the long afternoon light. Now the broad lawn was an unbroken field of white, and the pavilion at the center of the park stood empty and stone-cold against the gray sky. They were the only people there, which suited Ethan fine. He wasn't up to navigating other people's cheerfulness. Maya walked beside him with her mittened hand in his. She'd insisted on wearing her purple scarf with the tassels, even though it kept coming unwound and dragging in the snow. Every 100 steps or so he'd stop and rewrap it for her. She'd stand patiently while he did, looking around at the white landscape with the calm attention of a child who finds everything genuinely interesting. They reached the pond. It had frozen over at the edges, a shelf of opaque gray ice extending about 4 feet from the bank. But the center was still open water, dark and ruffled by the wind. 6 mallards were clustered there, their green and brown feathers ruffled against the cold, paddling in slow circles to keep the water from freezing under them. "They're still here," Maya said. She said it as though she'd been worried. "They live here," Ethan said. "They don't leave in winter. Don't they get cold? Their feathers are waterproof." Like a raincoat. He crouched down beside her. "And they've got fat under the feathers to keep them warm." She considered this with great seriousness. "Yeah," he said, "it is." They stood watching the ducks for a while. The snow came down in lazy spirals. In the distance, across the park, a crow called once and then was silent. "Dad? Was that lady this morning your boss?" He had been expecting this. Maya had a talent for waiting until you had almost relaxed before asking the thing you'd been dreading. "She was, yeah. Is she still?" "No." He paused. "I don't work there anymore." He watched her absorb this. She pulled her scarf up over her chin and looked at the ducks. "Is that why you were sad?" "I'm not sad, Bug. You had your thinking face." He didn't argue with her. She was right that he'd had his thinking face. "I'm figuring some things out," he said. "But I want you to know we're going to be okay." She looked at him sideways. "Promise?" He looked at his daughter. He looked at the ducks, still paddling their quiet circles in the cold water. He thought about Olivia, who had believed absolutely in his ability to figure things out, and how he had not always deserved that belief, but had always tried to. "Promise," he said. Maya turned back to the ducks. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dads always stay." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of faith. He didn't know if she had arrived at it herself or picked it up somewhere, but it landed in his chest with the force of a physical thing. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "They do." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a handful of breadcrumbs she had apparently planned this whole trip around. She tossed them toward the ducks with the satisfied air of someone completing a transaction. The ducks converged on the breadcrumbs. The snow kept falling. The white stretched out around them in every direction. Ethan Cole stood in the cold and thought. He went in on Sunday to return the equipment. It was a practical decision, not a sentimental one. The laptop belonged to the company. So did the external monitor he'd lugged home 18 months ago when the office had shuffled desks. He boxed them up carefully on Saturday night after Maya was asleep, taped the boxes, wrote Whitmore and a sock on the tops in black marker. He told himself it was just logistics. He almost believed it. He brought Maya because the alternative was asking his sister Rachel to watch her, and that would have required explaining why, and he wasn't ready for that conversation yet. The Whitmore and Associates offices occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in the Reno district. On a Sunday, in a snowstorm, the building was empty, the lobby echoing and cold, the security desk abandoned. He badged in his access, still worked, apparently, which felt wrong and took Maya up in the elevator. She pressed the button herself, the way she always did. His desk was exactly as he'd left it on Friday. The family photo in the wooden frame, the stress ball shaped like a globe. The sticky note on the monitor that said, "Hartwell proposal send by noon fry." He looked at the sticky note for a long moment, then peeled it off and crumpled it in his fist. He unloaded the laptop and the monitor. He took the photo and the globe stress ball. He left the nameplate. "Is this your office?" Maya asked, standing in the middle of the space and turning slowly. It was. She nodded thoughtfully, as though this was information she was filing for later. "Mr. Cole." He turned. Claire Whitmore was standing in the hallway outside the glass-walled conference room, holding 2 cups of coffee in paper cups. She was wearing jeans and a dark sweater, her hair down. She looked, without the armor of the coat and the portfolio, like someone who hadn't slept well. "I thought you might come in today," she said. "I wanted to be here." He looked at her. "You didn't have to do that." "No." She walked toward him and held out one of the cups. "I brought you coffee." He took it. Maya, who had been examining the potted succulent on his former desk, looked up at Claire with frank curiosity. "Hi again," Maya said. "Hi." Claire crouched down to Maya's eye level. "Do you like plants?" "Kind of. We have a cactus. It fell over once." "Cacti are very resilient," Claire said. "They usually survive." Maya seemed to find this satisfactory. She went back to examining the succulent. Claire straightened up. She looked at Ethan. There was something in her face that hadn't been there yesterday, not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone trying to be honest with themselves about something uncomfortable. "My mother was laid off when I was 9, she said quietly. "Christmas week. She'd been with the company for 11 years. She paused. "I'm not telling you that excuses anything. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I know what the look on your daughter's face means, and I should have handled yesterday differently." Ethan looked at her for a moment. He thought about the 8 words she'd spoken at his door. "You're fired. Effective immediately." He thought about how cleanly they'd cut. "The proposal was my mistake," he said. "I own that. The delivery was mine." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Ethan," he nodded once. Outside the windows, snow was still falling over Reno. The city was white and still and patient. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. The next 3 weeks were the kind of quiet that wears you down. He applied to 14 positions in the first week. 7 declined within 48 hours via automated email. 3 went to voicemail and stayed there. 2 led to phone screens that went well enough, he thought, but produced no follow-up. 2 didn't respond at all. He kept his routine because routine was the structure that held everything else together. Wake at 6. Make breakfast. Drop Maya at school. Come home to the apartment and work the job boards until noon. Pick Maya up at 3. Make dinner. Wait until she was asleep. Then sit at the kitchen table with the legal pad and the numbers. The numbers were getting tighter. The heating bill for January came in on the 14th. He put it under a magnet on the refrigerator, between Maya's horse drawing and a reminder card for her dentist appointment. He did not call his sister Rachel. He had not told Rachel anything. Rachel lived in Boulder and had 2 kids of her own and a mortgage and a husband who had recently been diagnosed with a bad knee that was going to require surgery. She had enough. She didn't need his weight on top of hers. This was what he told himself, anyway. The truth, which he was less comfortable examining directly, was that asking for help felt like conceding something he wasn't prepared to concede. He had held this life together alone for 3 years. He had made it work. The idea of saying to someone, to his sister, to anyone, "I can't do this, I need help," it felt like a crack in the foundation. He was afraid that if he let it open, everything would fall through. On the 22nd of January, 3 days before rent was due, he received an email from his landlord. The building had switched management companies. Rent for February would increase by $75. He sat at the kitchen table after Maya was asleep and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The apartment was dark, except for the glow of the laptop screen. Outside the window, the snow that had been falling intermittently all month had started again in earnest, thick, heavy flakes that piled up against the glass. He did not cry. He thought about crying. He let the thought move through him, and then he closed the laptop and went to bed. At 11:47 that night, his phone lit up with a text message. He nearly ignored it. It was from Claire Whitmore. "We need to talk. Are you available Tuesday morning? There's something I'd like to discuss." He read it 3 times. He set the phone on the nightstand. He lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the snow against the window and the distant sound of a plow working its way down the street. He didn't know what she wanted. He'd learned by now not to assume anything about Claire Whitmore based on tone alone. She was a person who packed a great deal behind a few carefully chosen words and let you sort it out for yourself. But he wrote back, "Tuesday works. What time?" And then he put the phone down, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he fell asleep before 1 in the morning. She'd picked a place called Novo Coffee on Curtis Street, the kind of place that took its espresso seriously and had tables that wobbled slightly and windows that ran floor to ceiling and gave you the whole city in winter. The gray sky, the white streets, the pedestrians bent against the wind with their chins buried in their scarves. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early and claimed a corner table. He ordered a drip coffee and wrapped his hands around the mug and waited. Claire arrived at 9 on the dot, which he suspected was a deliberate choice. She shed her coat and scarf and sat across from him without preamble. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Managing," he said. She looked at him with the same assessing quality she'd brought to everything, then seemed to accept his answer at face value. "Good, because I want to offer you something, and I need you to be in a position to be honest with me about whether you can do it." He waited. "The agency took on a new pro bono client 2 weeks ago," Claire said. "A nonprofit organization called Harbor Light Foundation. They support women and children coming out of housing instability, transitional housing, job training, community services. They've been operating in Denver for 6 years, but they've never had a coherent brand or a real communication strategy. They've been running on donations from a small circle of longtime supporters, and those supporters are getting older." She paused. "They need to grow their donor base. They need a presence. They need someone to build a strategy from the ground up. And you thought of me," Ethan said. "I thought of you because you're the best brand strategist I've had in 6 years, and because I should have found a better way to keep you." She said it evenly, without drama. "I'm not rehiring you. I want to be clear about that I can't right now, and I also think you'd find it complicated, professionally and otherwise. What I'm offering is a freelance contract, project-based. Harbor Light gets our agency's support at no cost. I bill internally. You get paid as an independent contractor through us." She slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. He unfolded it. It was a summary of terms. The number at the bottom was not extravagant, but it was real. Real enough to make the February rent. Real enough to buy Maya winter boots with zippers that worked. 50% up front, Claire said. "That was my idea. I know your situation." He looked up from the paper. "You researched my situation? I know what I pay people, and I know what rent costs in your neighborhood." She held his gaze without apology. "I'm not offering charity, Ethan. I'm offering work. Real work. The Foundation's story is genuinely important, and they deserve someone who will treat it that way. I believe you will." He looked out the window. A woman was walking by with a small dog in a red sweater, the dog's paws lifting fastidiously with each step. A city bus moved through the snow in a slow, deliberate way, as if it too was being careful. He had a rule about decisions made from desperation. Don't. Or rather, acknowledge the desperation. Let it sit in the room with you, and then try to evaluate the actual thing on its actual merits. The actual thing, on its actual merits, was good work for an organization that needed it, at a rate that was fair, with terms he could live with. The fact that he needed it didn't make it less real. "I have a condition," he said. "Tell me. I won't soften what I find. If the Foundation's current messaging has problems, and I'm guessing it does, I'm going to say so. I'm not going to tell them what they want to hear. That's not a condition. That's a requirement." Something shifted slightly in Claire's expression, not quite a smile, but the edges of one. "Do we have a deal?" He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. "We have a deal," he said. Outside the window, the snow kept falling. But inside Novo Coffee, it was warm, and the coffee was good. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Ethan Cole had something to do that mattered. Harbor Light Foundation operated out of a converted Victorian house on the edge of the Whittier neighborhood, 3 stories of brick and dark wood, with a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on the west side, and a garden in the back that was currently buried under a foot of snow. He met the executive director on a Wednesday morning. Donna Hargrove, 56, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of directness that comes from having spent decades in underfunded work. She shook his hand firmly and led him to a small office on the second floor, crowded with filing cabinets and framed photos of graduations and ribbon cuttings and women holding babies. "Claire Whitmore says you're good," Donna said, sitting across from him at a desk stacked with grant applications. "I hope to be useful," he said. "Useful is what we need. We've been doing this work for 6 years and we still can't get people outside our existing donor base to understand what we actually do." She slid a folder across the desk. "That's everything we have. Brochures, the website copy, the annual report. Take a look and tell me what you see." He took the folder home. He read everything twice. He made notes in the margins. The problem was not a lack of good work. The Foundation's programs were solid. The outcomes were real. The staff clearly cared. The problem was the language. Everything was written to the people who already understood, already believed, already knew the names of the programs and the acronyms and the internal logic. None of it was written to someone encountering the organization for the first time. The voice was institutional where it needed to be human. The stories were summarized where they needed to be specific. He started working during the days when Maya was at school, spreading his notes across the kitchen table, building a strategic framework in a Google Doc he kept open on the laptop. He interviewed 3 of the Foundation's program graduates, over Zoom women, who had come through Harbor Light's transitional housing program and were now employed, housed, their children in stable schools. He listened carefully. He wrote down the exact phrases they used. At night, after Maya was asleep, he drafted the narrative architecture, the founding story, the mission statement rewrite, the donor-facing communications guide. He worked until 1 or 2 in the morning and woke at 6, feeling the specific alertness of someone who has something to do. Claire checked in twice a week by email. Her messages were brief. "How's it going? Do you need anything?" And she did not offer opinions or suggestions unless he asked for them. He appreciated this more than he would have expected. The work needed space to develop at its own pace. He was glad she understood that. Maya noticed the change. "You're typing a lot," she observed one afternoon, coming into the kitchen from school and dropping her backpack on a chair. "I have a new project." "What kind?" He tried to explain Harbor Light in terms an 8-year-old could follow. He talked about how some families needed help finding a safe place to live, how the Foundation helped people get back on their feet. Maya listened with the same focused attention she gave everything, then went to the refrigerator for an apple. "Like how we needed help when Mom died?" she said. He paused. "Kind of, yeah." She bit into the apple and thought about this. "I'm glad someone's doing that," she said, and went to her room to do her homework. He sat at the kitchen table for a long moment after she left. He thought about what it had taken, in the 3 years since Olivia, to accept the forms of help that had come his way. The casseroles from neighbors, the after-school pickups from Rachel, the bereavement, counseling his HR department had strongly encouraged and that he'd resisted for 4 months before finally going. How hard he had worked to make needing help feel like something other than failure. He turned back to his laptop. He kept working. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early February. Harbor Light's board met in the parlor of the Victorian house, a room with high ceilings, crown molding, and tall windows that looked out over the snow-buried garden. 7 people around an oval table. Donna Hargrove at the head. 3 longtime donors in their 60s and 70s. A woman from a Denver community bank. A recently retired city councilman named Frank Bauer. And a younger woman, maybe 35, who had been introduced as a program graduate turned board member and who watched everything with careful eyes. Ethan set up his laptop at the far end of the table. He'd prepared 30 slides and then deleted 22 of them. He'd learned over 6 years of client work that the thing people remembered was almost never the slide. It was the sentence. You needed one sentence per idea, and the ideas needed to be in the right order. Claire had offered to be present. He'd asked her not to be. This was his work. It needed to stand on his judgment. He walked them through the strategic framework. The current gap between the foundation's actual impact and the way that impact was communicated to potential supporters, the structural changes to the narrative architecture, the donor-facing story framework built around the 3 graduates he'd interviewed. He showed them before and after examples of the mission language. He talked about specificity, how the difference between "we helped 140 families" and "we helped Sandra get her daughters into stable schools and stay employed for 18 consecutive months was the difference between a statistic and a reason to care. The board listened. The longtime donors nodded. The community bank woman asked a sharp question about cost per acquisition that he answered with numbers he'd prepared. Frank Bauer, the former councilman, said nothing for most of the presentation and watched Ethan the way experienced politicians watch people looking not at what you're saying, but at who you are while you're saying it. Then, the younger board member, her name was Angela Reyes, raised her hand. "I have a question," she said. "Go ahead." She looked at him steadily. "Why do you care? About this specifically? About this kind of work?" The room went quiet. It was the kind of question that demanded honesty or nothing. He put his hands flat on the table. "My wife died 3 years ago. Accident. Winter roads." He said it plainly, because there was no other way to say it that wasn't worse. "I had an 8-year-old and a lease and a job I had to keep, and there were people who helped neighbors, family. A grief counselor I didn't want to see but needed to. People who showed up and didn't make me feel less than for needing them." He paused. "I spent most of my adult life being the person who figured things out on his own. I thought that was a virtue. I've learned it's sometimes just fear wearing a different coat." He looked at Angela Reyes. "The family's Harbor Light serves, they're not failures. They're people who ended up in hard situations and had the courage to accept help and do something with it. That story deserves to be told honestly. I'd like to be the person who tells it." The room was quiet for a long moment. Frank Bauer spoke first. "How long to implement the full framework?" 90 days for the first phase. "Messaging, website copy, donor communications template. I'd want to revisit the strategy at the 6-month mark with real data." Donna looked around the table. The board members exchanged the small glances of people who have worked together long enough to read each other across a room. "Let us deliberate," Donna said. "We'll have an answer by end of day." He thanked them. He packed up his laptop. He took his coat from the rack by the door and stepped out onto the sagging porch into the cold February air. A crow was sitting on the garden fence, absolutely still, watching him. He looked back at it for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Maya's school to confirm he'd be picking her up at 3. Donna called at 4:15. The board approved the full proposal. Unanimous. Her voice had a different quality than it did in working meetings, warmer, less clipped. Angela voted first. "I thought you'd want to know that." He was standing in the school parking lot when the call came, watching Maya climb the monkey bars with 2 classmates. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. "Thank you, Donna," he said. "Thank you. This is the first time in 3 years someone's made me believe we might actually break through to new donors." A pause. "I'll have the contract amendment over to you by Friday. First payment on signing." After he hung up, he stood in the parking lot for a moment with his phone in his hand. He did the arithmetic one more time, automatically, the way he always did. The Harbor Light contract, combined with the 2 months of severance remaining, put him through April with enough left over to begin rebuilding the savings account. Not comfortable, not safe, not really, but viable. The difference between sinking and treading water. Treading water was enough. Treading water was something you could build from. He called Claire. They said yes. he said when she picked up. "I heard. Donna texted me." Her voice was warm in a way he wasn't entirely used to from her. "You did good work, Ethan. I mean that without qualification. I had time to do it right," he said. That helped. A brief silence. "Are you okay?" "Actually, okay." He watched Maya drop from the monkey bars into the snow below, landing in a crouch and immediately standing up to do it again. She was laughing at something one of the other kids had said. Her purple scarf was trailing in the snow. "Getting there," he said honestly. He picked her up and they walked home through the cold. She held his hand and told him about her day, a disagreement with her best friend that had resolved itself by lunch, a reading assignment she found boring, a new girl in her class who had a dog named Captain. He listened to all of it. That night, after dinner, Maya disappeared to her room and came back holding something in both hands, solemn as a small ambassador. It was the laminated certificate from his department service award 2 years ago. He'd tossed it in a box when he cleared out his desk, and apparently Maya had rescued it without telling him. "I brought this for show and tell on Tuesday," she announced. "You brought that to school?" "I told them my dad won it for doing really good work. Mrs. Gardner said to tell you she says you should be proud." He looked at his daughter. He looked at the certificate with its company seal and its careful language about excellence and commitment and service. "Mrs. Gardner said that?" Maya nodded, very serious. "She said your daughter talks about you all the time." He took the certificate from her hands. He turned it over. He thought about the last 6 weeks, the legal pad, the numbers, the snow, the cold, the severed connection to the structure that had held him together. He thought about the boardroom and Angela Reyes's question and the answer he'd given that had surprised him with its honesty. "Can I keep this?" he asked. "It's yours," Maya said, as if this were obvious. He hugged her. She let him, which at 8 was increasingly becoming a limited edition event. "Go brush your teeth," he said. She went. The school science fair was in the 3rd week of February. Maya had been working on her project for 6 weeks, with the focused intensity she brought to things that genuinely interested her. The subject was metamorphosis. She had a poster board covered in careful handwriting and photographs printed at the library. Diagrams of caterpillars and chrysalises and the tissue-level changes that happened inside. She had a plastic case with a preserved specimen, obtained through her classroom's science kit subscription, and a set of note cards she'd written herself. Ethan helped her carry it all into the school gymnasium on the morning of the fair, setting it up at her assigned table between a project on volcanoes and a project on solar panels. He adjusted the poster board so it stood straight. He handed her the note cards in the order she'd said she wanted them. "You've got this," he told her. "I know," she said, with complete sincerity. He stood off to the side while the judges moved through the room, clipboard in hand, stopping at each table to ask questions. When they reached Maya, he watched her explain the process, the egg, the caterpillar, the chrysalis, the transformation. Her voice was clear and steady. She used the word metamorphosis correctly and without hesitation, which he took as a small victory. One of the judges, a middle school science teacher with reading glasses pushed up on her head, asked Maya a question he couldn't hear from where he stood. He watched his daughter think about it, head tilted slightly the way she did when something interested her, then answer with visible confidence. Later, walking home with the project under his arm and Maya beside him eating a granola bar, he asked what the judge had asked. She asked if butterflies remember being caterpillars. "What did you say?" Maya chewed thoughtfully. "I said scientists think they might. There's a study about moths that remembered something they learned as caterpillars, even after they changed." He looked at her. "Where did you learn that?" "I read it." She said this as though reading were an entirely natural way to learn things, which to Maya it was. "Do you think it's true? That they remember?" He thought about it. He thought about it seriously, the way she deserved. "I think," he said, "it would make sense. The caterpillar doesn't stop being part of the story just because the butterfly happened. She considered this for almost a full block. Maybe butterflies remember being caterpillars, she said finally. But they don't wish they still were one. He stopped walking. She walked 2 more steps before noticing and turned to look at him. What? Nothing, he said. That was a good thought. She gave him the look she gave him when she suspected he was making more of something than was warranted, and went back to her granola bar. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the February cold and let the thought complete itself. He had been afraid, for a long time, that moving forward meant leaving Olivia behind. That building something new, a new way of working, a new shape for their life, was a kind of betrayal, a forgetting. He had held on to the grief, partly because it felt like keeping faith. But you could carry the past without being pinned under it. You could remember who you'd been, the husband, the partner, the person who'd had something good and lost it, and still be something else now. Not instead of. In addition to, the caterpillar didn't stop being real just because it changed. He walked the rest of the way home thinking about this. That evening, after dinner, he took the framed certificate Maya had brought to school and hung it on the wall of his home office, a small room he'd been using as storage until the freelance work had given him a reason to clear it out. He had put his desk in there, and his books, and the photo of him and Olivia from their trip to Glacier Park, where the sky had been a specific, impossible blue, and she had been laughing at something just out of frame. He hung the certificate beside the photo. He stood back and looked at both. His phone buzzed. An email from Claire. He opened it. The subject line said, "Welcome back." The body said, "Harbor Light sent their first updated donor appeal this morning. Donna says 3 new major donations came in before noon. I thought you'd want to know. Good work, Ethan. Genuinely." He read it twice. He wrote back, "Thank you. For the contract and for the coffee." He set the phone down and turned off the office light. In the living room, Maya was on the couch with her horse book, her legs tucked underneath her, her purple scarf draped over the armrest because she wore it everywhere. Always. The apartment was warm. The heating bill would be high. He would pay it. Outside, it was snowing again, the 14th snowfall of the season. By his count, Denver, in February, made no promises. The cold could keep going for weeks, yet gray mornings, frozen cars, the sound of plows in the night. But inside there was light, and the soft sound of a page turning, and a cup of tea going cold on the counter because he'd made it and forgotten it the way he always did. There is a kind of winter that comes for you specifically, that finds the particular thing you most depended on and removes it, quietly and without ceremony, and leaves you standing in the cold trying to remember who you are without it. Ethan Cole had spent 6 weeks in that winter. He had counted the days and the dollars and the ways things could go wrong. He had stood in a parking lot and a boardroom and a snow-covered park and told the truth, each time, in whatever form was required. He had not gotten through it because he was stronger than it. He had gotten through it because he had stopped pretending that getting through it alone was the same as getting through it well. The snow fell outside. The page turned inside. He went to the kitchen, poured the cold tea down the drain, and made a new cup. Some winters don't kill you. Some winters just teach you what it means to change.